Welcome to the Elevated Frequency Podcast, where we dive deep into the unseen forces shaping our lives and, more importantly, how to take our power back. I'm Shannon Morse, and today's conversation is one that I believe is critical for anyone waking up to the ways in which we've been conditioned to surrender our autonomy, whether through government systems, societal programming, or even our own deeply ingrained patterns from childhood. So if you've ever felt like something isn't quite right, or that the rules are always changing, that you're being gaslit by those in power, or that your choices are becoming more and more limited, then you're not imagining things. The dynamics we see in the world today mirror the dynamics of a toxic codependent relationship. And the question is, how do we break free? So joining me today is my co-founder, Lisa Kirby, and together we're going to unpack this dynamic, not just how it's playing out on a collective level, but how it connects to our own personal journeys of healing and sovereignty. Most importantly, we're going to explore actionable ways to reclaim our power, starting with our health, our mindset, and the ways we build real autonomy in our daily lives. So let's get into it. Lise, let's start with this first question for you. So you and I have both been on a deep inner work path for some time, and we recently began connecting on our own experiences with codependency. So when we reflect on these experiences, do you see any similarities in your relationships, your personal relationships, and how our country is relating to the government right now? Any sort of parallels that you can identify so we can kind of just look at probabilities or possibilities here?
Yes, and I love this topic, even though it can be controversial. I think the important thing to do now is to speak up about it. It's the big white elephant in the room and have these conversations without fear of, being isolated or rejected. It's like we need to have these conversations if we're going to move forward. And it's top of mind, at least for anyone living in the United States. But something I'm seeing on a microcosm level and then also on a macrocosm level is really just these strong emotional reactions to what's happening in the news and world events, like almost seemingly like someone did something to you personally. Like that's the level at which people are responding emotionally. And it kind of begs the question of, is this kind of emotional response and staying in that intense negative emotional state for days, weeks, months? We're seeing it with our clients. We're seeing it as portrayed through the news, maybe among family and friends. And what made me kind of think about this topic is like, wow, I remember reacting very emotionally intense like that, at times when I've been very, very triggered. Nowadays, they're few and far between. But back in the day, in my 20s, and leading up to my 20s, I was in a series of several codependent romantic relationships. And that's what it reminded me of these intense emotional reactions that were so connected to and intertwined with others, specifically my romantic partnerships at the time. So like boyfriends and stuff when I was a teenager. So it was reminding me of like, this feels like a very juvenile emotional response to a lot of things that we need to unpack here. Like number one being, are you so enmeshed or have you been so programmed? Like, has your attention and your brain been hijacked to respond in these highly emotional ways through whatever avenue, through the news or however you've been getting your world events? That it's an almost inappropriate amount of an emotional reactive response. Or are we all just adults walking around who never learned how to manage our emotions? We were never modeled that. And maybe it's a blend of all, both. But that was the first thing I thought of, is kind of, watching how people were reacting. And for me personally, I just want to throw in there, I had this response in 2016 when Trump was first elected. I remember having this very emotional, visceral reaction. And I checked myself. I was like, whoa, what is going on? Like, why am I responding like this? And then I made it a point from that day on, because I was like, that is giving my power away. And I hadn't felt that since my 20s. And I
Mm-hmm.
was in my late 30s at the time. And I was like, this is giving literally giving my life energy away. It's outsourcing it to somebody else, some other entity. And I made that commitment from that day. I was like, I will never again watch mainstream media, because the way that they are presenting information is so biased. It's so through a filter. It's meant to stir up an emotional reaction. So once I made that commitment, I have not had that kind of intense reaction since. So, Shannon, for you, in terms of what we were chatting about just before we started, that kind of filter, how do you see that impacted, whether it's from the news or maybe it's through other relationships where people are gossiping and you're getting information through a filter?
Mm-hmm.
How do you see that impacting potential like codependent relationships?
Well, let me see. Okay, let me see if I can understand how to answer that because it's so fascinating. I've been diving into this aspect and idea of codependency and high functioning aspects of codependency. And what's interesting is that I feel like what we spoke about earlier is that we all have a little bit of codependency inside of us. And some of us are on different ranges of the spectrum as it relates to codependent tendencies or how we are in relationships of certain kinds. And what I'm noticing is with the news and with the government, I have never been in a codependent relationship with that. I have never given my power away to that because of the way in which my parents raised me around a kind of understanding that there are many levers being pulled, and the majority of them we can't see. And with that understanding, I, from a very early age, was basically operating under this belief that there's so much that's happening behind the scenes that what we're getting ultimately is a single part percent, perhaps. And my codependent tendencies actually show up in other areas of my life. So sometimes they show up in work, sometimes they show up in personal relationships, but I haven't had that codependent tendency show up in my relationship to the government. However, I can see how the nature of codependency and the aspects of toxic relationships and being gaslit and things like that are prevalent, especially over the last 10 years, specifically with COVID and with the stock market and with the just so many things where we haven't been told as a country the actual truth. I mean, who knows what the actual truth is? So we're essentially children of the US, and we are in a relationship with our parents, being the government, where we actually physically can't trust what our parents are telling us. And that is, if we are not aware that that's actually what's occurring, then of course our emotional responses are going to be emotional. They're going to be erratic. They're going to be either angry or sad or confused or anxious because we are literally experiencing who we feel is supposed to be our protector and provider being someone that we can't rely on and trust. So with that, that's my experience of the whole system right now. And what you and I have been talking about is that there's an amount of that that we can't control. The majority of that we can't control. So what can we control, and what is the way in which we can move out of the aspect of giving our power away to that external source and actually move back into into us and kind of go like, okay, oh shit, that doesn't feel good. So let's like go back in and anchor ourselves into our firmly rooted position and then start operating from there. So I'll
I
leave it at that. That was a long response.
No, I love that you brought that up, because that's what it feels like. We've evolved we're adults now. If you're of voting age, right? You're an adult, and we've evolved. I agree with you specifically. It feels like in the last 10 years to almost be in this toxic relationship where we're looking at the government or people in charge as our parents when we're like, no, no, no. Like, you are an autonomous human being. And that's the kind of movement. Forget political parties. I think the more underground movement is this movement of people who are like, forget all of that noise. It's like the underlying root cause moving forward, or like root focus should be your own autonomy,
Mhm.
your own power, your own autonomy, so that you're not pulled by anyone or anything, no matter
Mhm.
what. And it's really, even though the Green Door Life is about nutrition, and we that's the kind of the doorway of transformation that people come through. When I think about it, we are helping create these physical bodies that are ready for that kind of autonomous power and being able to function and thrive without needing to rely on so many outside sources or gurus or this or that. It's like bringing the power back within, which is so much more settling, because then you can trust yourself. You could trust yourself. So, Shan, for you, where do you see, like in your current or past history, where do you feel like your codependency kind of came up and manifested in your life?
Woo-wee. Uh, well, Lisa,
Like, how much time do we have?
I know. This is actually a more recent revelation for me. And where I see it show up is, and this has really been over the last year as I've started to see new patterns of behavior with the way that my parents raised me. Um, Specifically, when I lived with my father for a period of time and my mom wasn't around, like the lack of boundaries that were in my environment during that time, and the type of relationship that I adopted with my dad based on my mom not being there, based on us not having a lot of boundaries during that time. And what I've noticed is the direct link to how I see my partner, Rafa, and what I believe is okay or not okay based on the environment that I grew up in. And
Mm,
without going into detail, just seeing that and having the awareness of that is massive. Because for a long time, I was operating under the understanding where I was like, okay, yeah, my upbringing was a little different, but there was a belief that I had that the upbringing that I had was a healthy upbringing. And healthy, I think, is, subjective. But there were, now as an adult, if I look back and if I think if I were to raise a child in the same manner, would I choose the same things knowing what I know now? And the answer is no. And with that, I can then look, okay, so if that wasn't the way that I would raise my child, then how would I raise my adult version now based on what I know that actually didn't serve me as a teenager or an adolescent or whatever that might be? And how am I still seeing my reality now as a projection of who I thought were my parents, who I thought I was in the eyes of my parents, like all of this. And what's wild, and it's still unraveling, I feel like these aspects, when we're going through reparenting ourselves and any sort of realizations about patterns, is that they are so sneaky.
yes.
They are so sneaky. You're going to be walking, you're be like, oh, everything's fine. And then you'll be like, wait a second, I'm doing that thing again. Oh no, I'm doing that thing again. Like it's just humming in the background because it's been doing that for 40 years or 30 years or whatever it is. So it is a conscious effort. And when I think about that and what we do inside of the Green Door, where we are really allowing and we're giving people the container to repattern their relationship to self, specifically around their physical body.
Mm,
And other practitioners will be doing it specifically around their emotional body or their mental body. but all of them are required. And I feel like what's so cool about what we do and what's been so beautiful having that framework and then going through this kind of reparenting of myself in the last year is I can see that there's this story arc that is exactly the same.
Wow.
So as we go through repatterning relationship with food or relationship with our physical body, we have an expectation of what we think it's supposed to look like. We have an expectation of what we think transformation is going to look like for us. And that expectation is actually not based in reality. It's based on something that happened in the past, and it may not even be applicable to what this transformation is. And the same kind of story arc happens when we're going through emotional transformation or mental transformation as well. So, and I could continue to go on and on like this because there's so many parallels, but I'm curious for you, Lise, when you think about just the way in which you've experienced giving your power away, or even I feel like there's another spectrum to it that you and I talked about, which is like almost like protecting, like an overprotecting of self, of power. And Rafa and I have been looking at this recently, and we are looking at the two spectrums, which is I get lost in the we.
Mm-hmm.
I will naturally lose myself, think about everybody else. What does everybody need? And sometimes it's in a covert way as well. And he has a tendency to get lost in the I when we're in a heightened state. So he will like go in and I
Yes.
will go out.
Right.
And they're two sides of the same coin.
I totally agree. I love that you brought up the similar like story arc when you go through any kind of transformation or self-development or healing in any of those pillars of wellness. That makes so much sense to me. And I'm having an aha moment in real time where I'm like, I remember like going to couples therapy for the first time and first like beating myself up. Like, I can't believe I need to, I'm doing this. Like, my relationship should be perfect. We all grew up with Cinderella. Like, oh, you just like the whole story was like, just get the guy. That was the story. It was like, just get the guy. Then your life's problems will be over. And then that was like, what about Cinderella part two? I just thought there were no problems after that. That was it. So, but what I realized through therapy, I remember asking our our therapist. I love that I can say that. It's actually truly genius. It's probably why we're doing so great together as business partners. But I asked her, I was like, can I just like skip over this stuff? Like, mentally, I knew where I wanted to go. I was like, can we just like skip over this stuff? And she was like, no. She's like, no, that's like the whole point is that your emotional body, you have these things happen in your life and it stores in your physical tissue. And she's like, we are going to be strategically working through things. And she's brought up like, you're going to think you're done with this thing. Like, you're never going to have this fight anymore. You're never going to be triggered about this anymore. And then it's going to come back and you're going to feel like a failure. And I'm like, this is the aha moment I'm having right now, because that's how I felt in evolving my relationship with food. I'm like, oh, I learned this information. I'm never going to binge eat ever again. I'm never going to, wake up one morning and then like over restrict. And it's like, no, this is not the path to anything. It's like this and this and this, and it's all over the place. But the trajectory is like, just keep moving, like stick with the momentum. And
Yes.
so I remember that feeling in therapy of feeling like, we already covered this. Like, we went through this a year ago. Like, why are we spiraling back here? But then reminding myself, and it's why we celebrate wins in our community. It's like reminding myself, and I try to be really, really cognizant of this, of like, you know what? I responded better this time.
Mm.
I was triggered, but you know what? I went for a walk and I was like, oof, like, let's let this energy move. And then I was able to get back in my rational brain.
Yeah.
So there is such a connection there. I think for me, what the hardest part in relationships, because like being very, very aware that I was codependent in my 20s. And I remember my final codependent relationship that was like just so enmeshed, where you don't know where you end and someone else begins. It's such a merging of energy, and you're so tangled in someone else's emotional state, and you're just like you're projecting on them, they're projecting on you, like you just, it's like, what is even reality when you're like that? But
Mm-hmm.
I remember going to the other extreme because I didn't have a an example or a model or a coach or anyone kind of guiding me at that time. It was just like, figure it out. We didn't have Instagram pop psychology to kind of navigate or help us with, and therapy wasn't like, I feel like everyone's in therapy now. It's like we're all reparenting ourselves
I
with
hope so.
these tools, yeah, that we never had. So I like didn't have that roadmap of this is normal, this is what to expect. So I just went the other side, the other way of like, oh well, if I'm just alone and I'm not in relationships and I'm just reporting to myself, and I just kind of like push people
Mhm.
away. And if I ever have a disagreement or conflict with someone, I just, bye, that's over. Like
Yeah.
that was my strategy for years, for years. And I don't think that's healthy either. So now it's like in my 30s and 40s has been this. I mean, sometimes I just laugh because I'm like, I feel like we're all just toddlers that have had to grow up again, and
Mhm.
really trying to find this kind of middle ground of, okay, it's not great to suppress your emotions, but also we can't live life just being triggered and enmeshed with everything. And that's kind of the extreme polarity of what we're seeing. I think in the bigger macrocosm of the world, we're seeing people who are either avoidant or totally enmeshed and triggered and emotionally reacting.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I love so much about what you just shared, and it was a lot, and I'm kind of letting it sink in. I think the pendulum, even the pendulum with like our nervous system, right? It's all the same. It's like we don't really want to be in a binge restrict cycle. We want to have conscious awareness so that we're able to move between the two when one or the other serves us.
Mhm.
And to know when to go within and when to move into that introverted state for whatever reason, or move into the extroverted state, and not vilify one or the other, but to have flexibility between the two. And that's what I'm really understanding, at least with myself in codependency, which is allowing me to see so much more around how other people are interacting. And it almost feels like, as you and I know with coaching, when we hear certain terminology and we hear individuals having extreme ideas or beliefs about things, it stands out to us because you and I have had that experience within ourselves before. We've believed that our body's never going to change. We've believed that carbs were bad. We've believed that we would never be able to change our physical makeup. We believed all of these things. And then once we realized that that was false, and that it was based on a false narrative that had been fed to us by social media, by our parents, by whatever our environment, then whenever we hear it from other people, the light goes off and we're like, well, actually, let's break that down a little bit and have a conversation and really dive in and go, is that true? So, around this codependency aspect, now that I am gaining more awareness about myself, I'm able to see it and how it's showing up with our government and people's relationship to what's happening in the world. I'm able to see it in people's relationship with their careers or their work, with their relationship to their partners. And I think one of the biggest tells for me right now, and I'd love to hear what yours are too, but like the biggest tell for me, whether I am expressing, I like whether I am in that codependent trigger,
Mhm.
or when I experience other people, is when they are looking to everyone else for what's wrong instead of going, oh, this is my trigger, it's my switch. So, what inside of me is causing me to have a need that's not being fulfilled by the external source? And yet I'm continuing to look out there going, why can't you fix my problem? Why can't you give me what I need? Why can't you tell me what I need to hear? And why can't I make a difference with you over there? It's like, why can't I fix you?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I think that's a great tell, is it's looking to blame outward and not take any kind of it's not even that there you need to take ownership or responsibility, but even just taking a moment to look within.
Yes.
And then I love what you're saying about the other kind of tell is like it's a very fixed reality.
Mhm.
Even those words, my husband Chanley and I, for those who don't know, we have we have interesting swear words in our house that we don't use. They're words like can't,
Mm.
never, always, things that are extreme. Those are the swear words in our house. Shouldn't,
Yeah.
should. Those
Yes.
are the ones that we've taught our kids that we don't use those in our house.
I love that.
Playfully, you know.
Yeah.
And it really it has helped. Truly, I like getting to raise our kids in this way has been it's been such a joy because we're like watching in real time the impact of like
Mhm.
giving them these tools and just like a different way to grow up and
Mm.
have a lot of these emotional regulation skills, and also like a growth mindset of like, hey, your reality is not as fixed as you think. And even with my kids, they go to a Montessori school, and we always go out on family walks, and we'll do like one-on-one walks with the kids. And I always tell them, I'm like, we're talking about school and checking in. And I'm like, is there anything that's coming up for you at school that like bothers you or like that you don't agree with? And, especially my oldest son, he'll speak up sometimes and say, yeah, they gave us this one assignment, but I didn't feel like it was enough time at all. And I was like, did you speak up about it? And I'm always prompting them like, hey, adults don't know anything. And you are your own, like, you need to learn how to advocate for yourself and don't be afraid to speak up for yourself. So I always tell them and try to instill in them, like, no one's here to save you or take care of you. It's, and I think this is the most important thing and gift that we are giving people in the Green Door Life is you can't help anyone when
Mm.
you can't, if you're not helping yourself first,
Yes.
especially if you don't even know where you are, like where your boundaries are. If you're in these kind of codependent relationships and you're triggered all the time, it's like you are literally of no help to anyone. I'm sorry, but you aren't,
Yeah.
because your place of service comes when you've at least established this baseline of, hey, my needs are met. And now
Yes.
it's like you can't suffer enough to help someone else who's suffering. And so the best thing you can do is get your shit together, take care of yourself. And it's like, turn that focus inward, be the change you want to see. I know
Yep.
it's easy, but it's like, it's true. You have to start within. I saw this quote the other day and I was like, that. It was like,
Mhm.
everybody wants to change the world, but no one wants to change themselves first. And I was like, because that's the hard part. It's so easy to get lost in, oh, this cause and that cause. It's like, how about you start with yourself?
Absolutely. Yes. My One of the coaches that I'm working with for personal awareness says this thing so beautifully to speak into what you're talking about. She shares that we can only meet people as deeply as we've met ourselves. And I just love that so much because the more work that I get to do for myself, the more I am illuminated into seeing where other people are in their journey
Yes.
without a right or wrong, but I can just be like, "Oh, I walked that trail before. It's a good one." or
Yes. That one's
or
not.
Yeah. Or, I wasn't quite ready for that one, but good for you.
Yeah.
And, but what you're saying is, I think for so long, our culture has just been brainwashed, to
Yes.
be quite frank with how I feel about it.
Yes.
And you and I have talked about it in different podcasts about our education system, about all of these different things. And I think right now, because some of these secrets that the government has been keeping are now being brought to light, I think it's kind of giving our population an opportunity to go and reflect, oh, wait, if that wasn't being shared with us, then what else isn't being shared with us? And then what can we believe? And then how is this actually affecting our lives? And that could bring up a lot of fear,
Yeah.
which I feel like is okay. It's a valid response that if our quote unquote parents, if our collective parents aren't being truthful with us, which means that we can no longer trust that they can perhaps keep us safe as just a very generalized aspect, then that will likely bring up fear. And then what do we do on the other side of fear? I can personally speak to this. So because it mirrors in a relationship. When I've had relationships where we've shared a house and there has been some sort of threat to that relationship, my reptilian brain, right, it goes immediately to, oh my God, where am I going to live? Right? It goes immediately to the hierarchy of needs and just base survival. And that is the trigger that is mine. And it's all I can think about. It's like, where am I going to get my needs met to survive in the way that I feel like I need to be able to survive? Once I'm on the other side of that experience, I get to realize that I am so capable of figuring it out. And I get to essentially learn about myself and what I am capable of. And in those moments, I develop my autonomy. But I wouldn't be able to develop my autonomy if I didn't have that experience. And so, not all of us get to have that type of experience. Some of us, this is one example. Some of us marry our high school sweethearts and we live with them the rest of our lives. And so, that's never really part of the equation. But that's just one example where I can have empathy for what individuals are experiencing right now, and also have empathy that it's part of the cycle. And that essentially on the other side of that cycle, if we want to maybe move the cycle along a little bit faster, that we can begin to implement strategies to develop our own autonomy. And that would be taking our power back. And that can happen in so many different ways. So, what you are actually doing with leading Awaken Your Cycles right now is speaking into a lot of ways that people can take back their autonomy.
I love that because it's so, I think when we think about change and transformation, especially if it comes abruptly, where it's almost like for people that haven't been doing the work and didn't really move through this stuff and come to this place of autonomy and empowerment, life is nuts right now. And you and I both have so much empathy and compassion for that because we've been through the dark night of the soul, many dark nights of the soul. And for a lot of people, I feel like they're just in it right now and trying to come out of it. And it can be identity shattering. It could be your whole world view, everything collapsing, everything that you ever thought was true is kind of crumbling. And that very much feels like the environment that we're all in. And at this point, again, if you've done that work, if you've been through a lot of stuff and moved through it, you do build a resiliency. And we're at the point, I mean, I'm at the point, I just kind of laugh. I'm like, well, we built our business literally at the beginning of a pandemic. So we can get through it, literally anything. Apocalypse, alien invasion. I'm like, well, we're going to figure it out or we're not. It's kind of like,
Oh,
it's,
good point.
in that sense, it's like the fear starts to subside. And when we think about this transformation or moving through some of these fears and really taking our power back and becoming more, having more agency and empowerment, it's like it doesn't have to be this big overhaul. Like we really can approach it just like we do with strength training, of like just a little bit. We're just going to do a little bit at a time. So when
Yes.
I first was teaching Awaken Your Cycles, which is focused on hormone health and really starting with our exposure to different light environments, I was very carefully delivering the information because I didn't want to create this panic and concern where people were like, well, oh my gosh, I can't be a healthy human because modern lifestyles, with our artificial light, and we have to be on screens all day for work. Like,
Mhm.
I'm screwed. I just invited them very gently to, hey, why don't you just try for like 1 to 3 minutes a day going outside, start in the morning and do that like 3 times a day. No big deal. Do you have 9 minutes a day to go outside? Yes, you do. And the monumental impact of that in just 1 week, there was two of our clients. One of them hopped on and she was like, she's had period issues and spotting, thought she was in perimenopause. 1 week of just these little incremental, just go outside, just
Mhm.
go outside
Yep.
or open the window. She had like this monumental transformation already. She's like, I haven't spotted in a week. Like, this is unheard of. She's been spotting for decades.
Wow. Wow.
And then another gal who was having insane insomnia the past 5 months, she's now sleeping through the night. And she can't believe it. She's knocking on wood, and so it's little things like this where it doesn't, if we try to approach change in transformation of it needs to be this massive overhaul,
Mm.
that's what also can be daunting and exhausting. Just little by little, maybe with in this conversation with the news, maybe just watch less, maybe just start with that.
Right.
Just
Yeah.
do a little less.
Yeah. Or even take inventory first of where in your life you're feeling like you get pulled out of your neutral state.
Yes.
Or maybe understand if you even understand what a neutral state might be for you, you
I
know?
think maybe that's part of the problem is people have been so pulled around that they don't even know what their center is. I know for me, Shan, and I talk about this a lot, but I didn't have any sense of how pulled I was until we moved out of California. And my
Yes.
whole nervous system had a reset. I was operating at high octane. If
Yes.
you don't think like everybody else in the Bay Area, you are, it's just intense, is all I can describe
Yeah.
it as.
Absolutely. So I think here's the thing that really feels like the first step in, and this is what we do with the Green Door, and it is incremental. It's over time. It's what you're doing in Awaken Your Cycles. It's what we do with Awaken Your Nutrition. And it's what we're also going to be doing in Awaken Your Strength. So, hint, hint, that's coming.
Yes.
So, one of the first steps that I think in breaking free from just any toxic relationship is reconnecting and re identifying with what it looks like to trust ourselves. Whether that's trusting our own bodies, trusting our own intuition, trusting our own critical thinking, and especially for people who have been conditioned to doubt themselves, which is wrapped up in that whole kind of like gaslighting.
Yes.
So when I think about that, and whatever way, shape, or form it takes for people in their lives, and I'm actually telling myself this as I'm saying out loud, like there's a lot of self advice I'm giving lately, which is great. If we have a framework, if we have an area in our life where we want to develop trust in ourselves, sometimes I think it's going to be really, really important to get external guidelines because the patterns that we've created for extended periods of time, external guidelines that we can really trust, friends, community, anyone in our life that we can talk to that can help us to pull and decipher those limiting beliefs and the false dogma that we may have adopted and what's actually happening in reality. And I find that if we don't have someone that's able to show us something new, that it's going to be almost impossible to work ourselves out of the dogma that we've been conditioned with. And I say that because, in a very simple way, we can't see the back of our head.
Yeah, exactly.
We literally can't see the full perspective. It's impossible because
Yeah.
we haven't lived all lives. And so, choosing someone that you trust, which is why coaching is so powerful, choosing someone that you trust that is there to hold a container to help you to learn how to listen to your body, to your emotions, to your inner dialogue, to your spending habits, to the way that you relate to intimacy in your life and your beliefs around that, like whatever the framework is to your relationship with the government. If you have a desire to rebuild trust in certain areas, I mean, it's all connected, so it's going to create a ripple effect. But I can say that doing all the work that you and I have been doing over the last however many years around our physical bodies with nutrition and quantum biology and strength training and mobility, that is not a direct relationship to rewiring behaviors of codependency. So we do need to have specific, focus specific training
Yeah.
for whatever we might want to be focused on. And of course, as we do one thing, we will have a tendency to do all things. But I am starting to see for the first time rather clearly that it actually doesn't apply everywhere.
Mm.
Um, because if I was able to adopt my non codependent tendencies with the government, with my close relationships, then that would be a direct side by side. I heal one thing, it heals everything.
Yeah.
But that
That's
actually hasn't been the case, right?
right.
So I do feel that where we can build a type of awareness and tool, and I might change my mind later. By the way, that's okay. You
Well,
know?
this is interesting because I mean, for like before the whole like 2016, when I was like all of a sudden got pulled into politics that I never cared about before my entire life. I feel like with politics, I grew up and I was like, these guys, all these things, this is so shady.
Yeah.
I'm not spending any of my time or energy. That was my synopsis of the government and politicians. I never wanted to vote. I was like, this whole thing is just a circus act. I don't
Mm,
care. And then 2016 happened, and I was like, wait a minute, they're telling me to care. Wait a
mm,
minute. And I had to really unpack there. But I wonder if it's certain topics that we don't see these patterns play out because we just write them off. The brain can only handle so much. And
yeah.
that's the thing. This is what's so interesting is that for so many people, like politics were never like your whole entire life. Now it's like it feels like it's just this consuming force that has taken over people where I'm
Mm,
like, what is your purpose? What lights you up? What
mm,
brings you joy? What can you do and spend your time on besides reading the news to me? I don't want to hear it. I want to hear about what is your scariest dream that you've had since you were 10. Like, tell me that. This is why I can't have normal small talk conversations. I'm like 1 minute in, I'm like, tell me everything. That factor of have we been conditioned or brainwashed, whatever word you want to use, have we let it become this entity, this thing that has taken over
mm.
our autonomy, our agency, so that it's become such a huge focus in our life. I mean, that's the part I am so grateful for the Green Door life of having this greater purpose. I don't have time for that. Literally, we are
Yeah.
building something, and if you don't have something that is so just like that's what's pulling me, that and raising my kids and family and stuff like that. But that greater purpose of I need to focus my attention here. There is literally no time for that. And
Yeah.
I feel like that purpose will, if you don't have that strong purpose, it's so easy to get your attention grabbed. And that's what people want. The powers that be, they want your attention. They want your big emotional reaction. That's what's keeping people and things in power and continuing to manifest. So
Yes.
it's really interesting to looking at those patterns and seeing where they play out in different parts of our life. And I even think just the process of going, having a guide, and for example, with nutrition, going through a transformative process all of a sudden just made me more aware in general. If I had this relationship to food that I was so unaware of, and I was
Mm-hmm.
so unaware of how toxic that relationship was, it just made me interested in other parts areas of my life, and got different coaching in other areas. But I was kind of like, if I didn't see this, like, what else am I not seeing?
Yes. Oh
Have
my
you
God.
felt that kind of light bulb moment go off in different kind of coaching experiences you've had?
Oh yeah. Oh, the unconscious is so prolific.
Yeah.
And when you see it, and I think I've shared it with you before, because it has this resonance and this feeling and this image, that realizing areas where you have been unconscious for the majority of your life feels like opening up the refrigerator to see the Grand Canyon inside.
Yes.
Where you open the door and you are like, how long has that been there?
Yeah.
And then how many areas of my life has that been impacting everything that I'm eating? Or, it's like, how long has that been in my fridge?
Yeah.
And when that starts to happen, which really is such a beautiful and also painful experience, because when we have moments like that, we realize that we're actually not who we thought we were,
Right.
because there's this illusion of what we thought was real or what we thought was happening, which was actually a facade. And as a relationship to that, like, we essentially are what we believe. And if our beliefs are then dismantled and we're shown that something that we believed about our parents or upbringing, whatever it is, actually isn't based in a reality, or it was based on a false premise of what actually occurred, and then something else comes to light and we realize that that actually didn't happen, or something along those lines, we actually get to, I don't even want to say have to, because some people don't and they choose to just not see it, and that's okay. That's their choice. But we have an opportunity to create a completely new identity, because now our beliefs have changed.
Yes.
And with what we're talking about with, individuals who are surrounded by a certain type of environment of media, or the people that they are surrounded with, you and I have so many friends who are still in California, and you're in Texas, I'm in Tennessee. When I speak to my friends in California, or even when they come to visit, we had our dear friend come out to visit, and he expressed that when he was on the plane going back, he sat next to a woman who was from Oakland. They shared the same age of their little ones. And she was basically just talking all of the negative experiences that she has around living in the Bay Area, and all of the negative experiences that she has around taking care of her 2-year-old. And he tried to just spin it to positive, spin it to positive, and she just couldn't go there. It's like her consciousness wasn't even able to consider reality, that her negative environment wasn't all that there was.
Right.
And he had spent 5 days here. And we talked about that that was his norm before coming to our house and spending 5 days. And he realized the environment that he's living in California is all that, but he's numb to it because it's everywhere.
Yeah.
So the same thing goes with news. Sometimes we just need to take a detox break from whatever that thing is. If we're doing a candida cleanse, if we're looking to do a dry January, if we're looking to look at our spending and our finances, or if we're thinking about perhaps giving ourselves a hot second from the news, just take some time. Let your own dialogue be present, right? Like, let your own thoughts do their thing. Like, even don't listen to music. Sometimes I will turn off all music so I can hear my thoughts.
Me too.
Right.
Drive silently in the car, and I sometimes I think, I'm like, people must if anyone saw me here driving for an hour with no music, no podcasts, nothing, just a total detox. And that is the most radical, like psychopathic thing you can do. But Shan, what you're touching on, and I want to reiterate this point, because you were saying, let's say we have this moment or this realization, or we're taking that detox, and you forget what you're so angry about or whatever. So you start to kind of like come back to this neutral place.
Mm-hmm.
Then what you were saying is like it's so important to pick the right guide, the right program, the right coach if you're interested in kind of planting a new pathway, right?
Yes.
I think one thing to look out for, because you were starting to touch on it, and I think it really makes our program at the Green Door Life stand out in any program that we deliver. We're never just blindly telling people, this
Mm-mm.
is true for you. Here's what to do. And of course, we will alleviate as much of the workload as we can with certain things that are kind of like universal truths. But even at that, it's like, there is so much variance and personalization, and everyone is just so uniquely different that there's no one exact path of healing and transformation for anyone, with food, with exercise, with relationships. And so I think one of the things when you were sharing kind of like what a coach would say, or a guide kind of walking you through a transformation, is that the specific words you were using were so inviting and focused on like what's coming up for you. So like a coach that's asking you lots of questions, a
Mm-hmm.
coach or a program or a guru that's having you check in with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Those are green flags. And I would say on the opposite of that, because you and I have both been in coaching programs and have maybe kind of bought into or felt influenced by certain gurus at times, the red flags for me there were the rigidity, and it very much
Mm-hmm.
like, this is what it is. And if you don't follow this marketing layout, then your business is going to fail. Or this is the diet. And if you don't follow this exact diet, then you're not allowed in the group, and you're going to not see results. So
Yes.
those have, for someone who has self-identified as all or nothing or kind of in the extremes, part of maturing, I feel like, is coming to this more neutral, moderate middle ground, and trying, like, not seeing anything as fixed, and
Mm-hmm.
really being flexible there. And it allows for that conversation, it allows for experimenting, and then really it almost like hyper tunes your antennas to being on the lookout for those red flags of these gurus, programs, coaches, whoever, government,
Mm-hmm.
relationships, partners who are just telling you your reality, or
Mm-hmm.
telling you what it is.
Yes.
So have you
Yes.
found that to be true as well, and kind of the different, pillars of health, or anything that you've explored in terms of self-development?
With having coaches where it's like red flag, green flag kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, and it's very sneaky. So
Oh, yeah.
I feel like if we aren't aware of where we will move out from our center as individuals, then it's very easy to be swayed.
Yeah.
So again, it's so, so, so important to find something where it is inviting you to do your own work and listening to your own voice. And some of the red flags, I feel like this is a great thing to kind of like close it up.
Mhm.
So some of the red flags that I can identify and experience is where individuals will express an extreme view of right and wrong.
Mhm.
I think extreme views of right and wrong will be subjective. And of course, I'm not talking about things like murder or rape or abortion, that like that's not what I'm talking about here.
Yeah.
Um, I'm talking about when you are going to get support from some sort of coach and really putting your trust in them. The experiences that I've had, and one in particular is coming to mind, is where the instructor or the facilitator was actually putting down certain archetypes of individuals that would come to him for support, for guidance, for anything like that. And basically making their experience of discovery and something that would be very vulnerable for them, making it wrong in some way.
Mm.
And I mean, as I say it, I'm like, oh, it's such an awful thing. And I feel like some of the red flags are rather tricky. If you bring something, and this will go for any sort of circumstance, whether it is with government, whether it is with significant other, your work, your relationship with your boss, like a coach, whatever, if you bring something to someone and say, this is concerning to me, or this is bringing up feelings like this, and the person basically goes, you don't know what you're talking about, that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Or are you imagining things? Or that didn't really happen? Or I don't think that that's the whole story, or whatever, where they go in and question you about your reality, about your belief, without first and foremost understanding your full perspective.
Yeah.
That's a big red flag to me.
It's like the ultimate gaslighting.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that can be super covert.
Yeah.
And I think this just is, again, one of the reasons why it's so beautiful to have some sort of community where you can have feedback and kind of like temperature check things, which is why I love that our Green Door Life community is growing in so many different ways with different practitioners and different types of clients and members that are coming, because we have a more full perspective as new people come from different walks of life and different age groups and all of these different things, so that we can actually have this kind of tribal council,
Yes.
where we get
Like
to check
we're,
in.
we're recreating, on a smaller scale, what would be a more balanced kind of ecosystem or community. Because forgive me if I said this before, but it's like you're never going to agree 100% of the time with
Mhm.
what someone believes or says. Like
Yeah.
and that's the point. Like we were not meant to come, I don't believe, hey, let's come to earth and we'll all agree about everything and there will be nothing will be different. The contrast is there for a reason. And I
Yes.
love that even in just like your experience and my experience with our own bodies and nutrition and exercise, like we've had totally different journeys and experiences, and that alone, even
Mhm.
though we're at a similar age and we're both women, but it's like that alone is so telling that everyone's going through their own journey. So it's so lovely to have this full panel of practitioners and coaches and community members that's so diverse. And then everyone's having different experiences and can give different kinds of support. It's just so, with that same kind of underlying theme of that no one's telling you anything, no one's forcing you, telling you, it's
Mhm.
all an invitation, like this co-creation of
Mhm.
figuring out what is best for you and again bringing that power back. I mean,
Yes.
this is why sometimes I can't sleep, because I'm like, we have so much to do.
We're in a beautiful place because we get so excited about what we do, and it's amazing. So, for those of you who are listening, just giving you an insight into, if you want to stay in these types of conversations, of course, you can continue to listen to the Elevated Frequency podcast. But if you're actually looking to build more autonomy with your physical self and also your mental self, this is an opportunity to enjoy some of our services in different ways. So, the easiest way that you can kind of learn more about what we do is to join our free community. And then the second easiest way is to move into our all access pass. So within our all access pass, we have, this is our virtual wellness studio. We also have a lot of free information and education around sleep, quantum biology, nutrition, mindset, emotional release, somatics, and we're building this library all the time. And then finally, if you want to work with us in an even deeper capacity, you can look at some of our fuller programs, which are generally 12 weeks to either awaken your nutrition or awaken your cycles or awaken your strength, which is launching here in a few months. So before we kind of sign off, Lise, is there anything that you want to leave individuals with, easy ways that they can start to take back their power, just as a starting point?
Yeah, I would say if you can have enough awareness, just the first step of what is pulling my attention, and triggering me in maybe an unhealthy way, or just taking up a lot of your attention, if you can do that less. I know I can already hear moms right now. I can't just not give my kids attention. But if there's, if you're being drawn to some story or some belief, I remember being in that state when my kids were little, and having a toddler is so much of it, but I was attached to the story. So even if you can't not take care of your kids, but can you detach from the story? Just if you catch yourself in that loop, that one thing that is kind of taking over. For me, I love journaling because that's always been my way of becoming more present and aware. But I think everyone has their own modality that they like to go to. Maybe it's singing or dancing or going on a walk or a voice note, whatever it is that helps you kind of process and get your energy back to you. I think is just an easy kind of step one, like identifying what is pulling my energy and can I do that just slightly less.
Totally. Absolutely. Or even like a 1 to 7 day detox of whatever that thing is, just giving yourself a little bit of space
Yep.
so you can start to move back into your own energy around that topic. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Okay, everyone. Well, this was an awesome conversation. I'm so glad we had it. I hope those of you who are watching enjoyed it as well. If this sparked something for you, which I hope it did, please feel free to send us messages, visit us at thegreendoorlife.com, and also definitely check out our Instagram where you can find prompts to join our free community. And thank you guys for listening. Thanks, Lise. This was amazing. And we'll see you guys next time.